Welcome to Dynamic Leadership Ask Me Anything series. This I put these together to enable people to have who have questions about how this actually works in the real world. I invite people to bring their real situations, real-time situations in because dynamic leadership is about micro recoveries, not suppressing, but by addressing things so early in the cycle that it appears as stability. So I'll start with a couple of questions that I have and then invite you to come on stage. There's a ticker on the bottom, but that link is also in the comments or the chat, so you can do it easily rather than trying to capture that link. But it's essentially studio.restream.io/ESK/CLVX CLVX CVL. And again, it's in the comments and the chat. So I'll put that up here so it's static. And we'll get rid of the ticker. All right, so feel free to join in. And depending on what platform you're on, I may see it come in the chat, but since I'm on multiple platforms, I may not see it. Again, if if you've watched any of the content, you know this is all about, while I call it prevention, it's really more focused on catching things so early in the cycle that it it doesn't impact the situation. This is not about suppressing. And the point that emotional intelligence makes, because it was created before a lot of this was known, is that personality is fixed, identity is fixed, intelligence is fixed, and they're not. We can change them because those are residing in the network of neurons as habit patterns, and habit patterns are determined by myelin and synapsis and synaptogenesis. Habits are the path of least resistance. By changing the myelin and the synapsis situation, you change the path of least resistance. In fact, while I'm waiting for people to come online, I will pull up a quick slide that illustrates it. This is the slide I'm talking about. We have 600 milliseconds. It's just over the first half second, and that's because there's a 100 millisecond period of time, what's called pre-listening, where the central nervous system in the brain are predicting what's through the doorway. Every time you shift your scene, there's a quick assessment of what's going on, and wherever you are, there's this constant pre-listening. This is why the perpetual question is so. And then so this first 2/10 of a second, you have the initial detection. So perpetual question is a good one. Having a implementation intentions can help you here because quick shift, but also conditioning in things like the swish pattern. That's going to come into play here. The second 2/10 of a second. So we're talking 200 milliseconds. This is your exercise that you can do where you train your subconscious to not see things as threats, but to see them as neutral and opportunities. And then we have the mobilization and the firing a pre-trained anchor is good here, but there's other ones. There's levers in each of these, and in work with the person, what we're doing is looking to find one that works in all situations. So the idea is we have to break the system, put into situations that are progressively harder and more challenging. And as it breaks, we can go back in and add levers that they can use. And every lever doesn't work the same for each person, which is why there's dozens of them, and we use them depending on what works for the person. right, here's a question. Why do smart people, why do smart, capable people still break down under pressure even when they know what to do? So this, I often say that to know and not do is not much better than not knowing. And the point is, on a bad day of a bad week, you probably have less access your to the best version of yourself than you do on it. We want to kind of even out, so that's not, it doesn't impact us as much. But why do they still break down under pressure? When you get into a pressure situation that you perceive as pressure, fight or flight begins to happen. When fight or flight happens, our close down. The Once you're in a stress situation, you are no longer seeking growth opportunities. You're now looking at protection. You go from neutral to fight or flight, and fight or flight, by definition, is going to prevent focus and engage. So what happens is a person is going along and everything is calm, and they read an email that changes their world, and then they're hyper vigilant about other risks. They're monitoring for other risks. If they're not careful, they will start looking inside, and it scales up what's inside. In other words, they it starts catastrophizing, not because more negative stimuli are coming in, but because they are imagining the worst case scenario. I say worry is like negative goal setting. They start worrying about things that could possibly come up, and that's like negative goal setting, and it just builds and builds and builds. So that's why that happens, and then they're not able to access the best version of themselves. So rather than think of it as how do I stop breaking down, what we want to do is correct the pressure here. We want to have tools so that as we feel it coming up, we can shift our attention. A simple thing you can do in this first stage is just turn your head and look at something else when you feel it coming up. Now, you may not feel it coming up, but if you feel it coming up here, just turn your head. And by turning your head and looking at something else, it's going to reorient you to what else is going on, but it's going to help you move up to the bigger picture. You can also take in a breath by breathing through the nose and exhaling through the mouth. You're going to slow that down, that rising anxiety or that rising moment. Keep in mind, this first 600 milliseconds is all what's considered the reaction time of the conscious mind. So the subconscious is busy. The network of neurons is busy during this period, and it's happening so fast, but the network of neurons can process at 11 million bits per second. So fast in the network of neurons side is hyperspeed compared to the conscious mind, which is only 50 bits per second. That's what this is about. It's about the micro recoveries. The same way if you look at the Olympics going on right now, if you watch these downhill ski racers and even the giant slalom, they're going so fast. They're making micro recoveries the whole time. They're sliding and they're constantly making these micro adjustments. And falls happen when they can't make the adjustment fast enough. That's when falls happen. And this is the same thing that we can do cognitively in this respect. That's catching it. It's like traction control. Dynamic traction control works in different conditions. So dynamic traction control will work whether you're in snow or rain or great asphalt or on the racetrack. Dynamic traction control is constantly, there's a feedback loop. It's constantly reading the inputs coming in. So it doesn't stop the skid. What it does is it reacts to the skid so fast, the skid is not noticeable. That's the difference. And that's what we're going to do. That's what we do here. So that's how it's not that capable people are not able to not break down. It's that their recoveries are too late. So we want to move the recovery sooner. If motivation fades under pressure, what actually carries performance through? If motivation fades under pressure. So this is similar. If motive, so you've most people probably have been to a seminar and they come out of it, they're all excited and gung ho and let's make all this stuff happen. And the next day it starts to wane a little bit. Day after that it starts to wane, and eventually the motivation drops off. While it's not the same exact thing, because this is talking about under pressure, but keep in mind, in this network of neurons side, we have 100 billion neurons interacting with anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons. That creates uh, trillions, trillions of associations. That seminar in this example is but one instance, is one experience. You leave, and the system is always wanting to get back to homeostasis, status quo, stability in the status quo. You leave the seminar, the second day, you're moving towards status quo. By the third day, you're back to status quo. The pressure thing is a little bit different because with the pressure, it reminds us of anxious moments before. The anxiety and excitement and cognitive dissonance to the untrained mind all have the same signature. So excitement, anxiety, cognitive dissonance, and cognitive dissonance occurs when you're doing something that you believed couldn't be done. You're moving against a belief. So all of those create this sensation, and that sensation can be interpreted by the subconscious, the network of neurons, as anxiety. And if that happens, it's going to start putting you back into that fight or flight. When you go into fight or flight, you lose some of your capability, if you will. When people say my subconscious took over, what's actually happening? Yeah, I was having a conversation because I talk about the network of neurons, and the person said, yeah, my neurotransmitters just went haywire and they just took over. Well, yes, it feels that way. That's the sensation. Because it's going so fast, and because the neurons, think of it like a mob. The mob will grow and it attracts other people, and other people who were not kind of thinking of protesting or whatever, they get caught up in it, and this mob grows and this mob mentality happens. That's what you can think of as you say the neurotransmitters took over. I would say that the person chose not to intervene and allowed the network of neuron momentum to just continue. It's similar to what I was just saying in that we've got to have micro recoveries. You have to be able to recover very quickly. You may not have been in this situation yourself, but you probably have been in a situation where somebody's angry, they're upset, they're annoyed, they're screaming and yelling, and then a person shows up that's really important to their livelihood. They shut up and they smile and they're calm and they're interacting with this person like nothing ever happened. That is a recovery. We have the ability to recover, but what to do is keep escalating the other thing because we think we can't. And while I don't fault emotional intelligence at all, emotional intelligence, when it was created, we did not have access to the brain scanning tools at that time with the brain, the neural pathways, etc. And so emotional intelligence started with this belief is fixed, intelligence is fixed, identity is fixed. And while that's nothing against emotional intelligence, things when we move on, but keep in mind this is still in its infancy. We've got tens of thousands of years evolution as a hunter-gatherer. It's only the last 100 years that we've even had the spewing impacting our lives on a regular basis, and only a couple of decades with the computer in our pocket. It's happening faster and faster and faster, and artificial intelligence is seeing it up even more. That shift not apparent when emotional intelligence was created, but now we know. And so again, if you want to stop the network of neurons, you focus here. And I would say when you leave this event here, you do nothing else but change your question. Everyone has a perpetual question. Some people it's positive. What's the upside of this? Some people it's exploited. Who can I take advantage of? Other people it's self-degrading. What am I good enough? Am I right for this? Can I do this? Where's the shoe going to drop? Yeah, this can't be right. What's the rest of the story? It's all that perpetual question gets us into a state of mind that's already on our heels if we don't catch it. So changing it is true prevention. After that, it's about quick detection and recovery. And in here, you may not notice it, but you want to start feeling that sensation first comes up instead of suppressing it, which is the habit, and suppressing it. It's we don't suppress it because it works. We suppress it because it's what we've always done in most cases. When that feeling starts to come up, you can attention. Just look to something else. Look out the window if you're near a window. Look to another part of the room. Open a book and look at a page. Anything that you can do to shift your attention, because if you don't shift your attention is drawn to this thing that's rising up, and it treats it like a tiger, and it's coming from inside. So you want to stop that. I'd have to interact with the person more. These questions just came in, but I would have to interact with the person more one to one to see where they're missing it. It's here, it's here, it's here. And it could be on the, I'm not showing the conscious mind side on this slide, but it could be on the conscious mind side where you do have choice. And that's where emotional modulation comes in. We can use emotional modulation here, but the big part of it is before you respond. So if you're feeling that tension come in, and that is the true last line of defense, when you feel that tension coming in, rather than react, you can do the emotional modulation. That takes anywhere from a second to 90 seconds, and can happen actually instantaneously because you can make it a habit. But that would be another option, to not have the neurotransmitter or the subconscious to take over. But people describe it as, yeah, the subconscious jumps into the driver's seat and just starts running. Yeah, if you have comments, questions, please put them in the chat. I'm watching the chat now. That's the other reason I wanted to do the many things, because when I'm doing my live events, I'm so focused on the slides and the drawings, and I don't always look over at the chat to see it. So this works because I'm actually looking at the chat each time. How does a leader accidentally create load instead of capacity? And this probably comes out of when I talk about actually impact their environment as well, and about that too, where the leader can introduce more stress into the environment. Forget is how it was when they were a frontline employee. Leaders have a lot of leverage. The gap between the ability for a leader to impact an employee's life versus the employee's ability to impact the leader's life negatively, that gap is so large. What I mean by that, Stephen Covey used to call it the rice bowl. Leader actually controls the person's well-being, because without that job, they don't have shelter, they don't have food, they don't have security, they may not have a family after that. Getting fired doesn't mean you lose your home. It just means you have to look for another job. But also, people tend to think every bad thing is going to get them fired, which is not the case. And usually, leaders, just by not saying hello, just by saying hello in a different way, just by snarling when they get bad news. Before I understood this, before I started approaching it from leadership, which is the really fast uh, recoveries, I used other models to slow it down. And one of the things I used to do was make sure that people, heard when they heard bad news, that instead of letting their reaction show, to condition themselves to say, thank you for sharing that information. What else can you tell me about it? Always ask a question, because what you don't want to do is let your face show that you're upset. And here's how I got here, because we were moving quality out into the field, and we 50,000 people moving quality into that organization. You can imagine the difficulty. We had instructors and part-time, not part-time, were taken out of their role as like extra duty. So they would do their role 60 or 70% of the time, and then 20 or 30% of the time they would be training on quality. And then I was managing that and governing that rollout. And I would see leaders tell me that they're empowering their people And the people would tell me that I'm not empowered at all. So I started observing what's going on. And you'll see that the leader would get bad news, and their reaction was so intense and so visceral that the employee would cower, because the leader is reacting to the bad news, because now they have to go think about this. They've got to talk to their boss. It could impact their bonus. This, all that's going on in their mind. That gets shown to the employee. The employee interprets it. Remember, it's not a conscious decision. It's a network of neurons decision, and the network of neurons attaches it to bringing bad news to my manager. They don't see the other part of it. They think, oh, if I bring bad news, it's going to be painful. And then next thing you know, they're often running into this: I don't have empowerment, I don't have autonomy, and my boss doesn't like me, and I might get fired. That's why it's hard for people to bring bad news. You want bad news early, you have to encourage it. Dopamine and serotonin are always going. So the dopamine tells this employee, in this case, the dopamine tells the employee, don't do this. And the serotonin, because that hit is such a dip and it feels so awful, they're saying, I'll never do that again, because they don't benefit. Well, how do they benefit by giving news? It's your problem, not theirs. The work may fall to them, but the work is fine. I get paid to do the work. Well, why should I risk losing my job to bring news? This is where the leader has to be able to provide a response that something like, I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. Can you tell me? What's your thoughts in terms of what we should do? That's now you're leading into intrinsic motivation and self-determination theory, autonomy, competence, relatedness. By asking that question, have you what's possible in terms of which direction we should go? Or let me ask you this, information, whatever. Just ask a question that's engaging, encouraging them. Now the dopamine is saying, hey, that was a good thing you did. Your boss likes you. You're going to keep your job. It's the same. You're using the same system as a fear-based system. And you as the leader, if you're watching this, understand maybe about the positivity exercise and emotional modulation, but your really doesn't. And you're not going to be able to have them go through a positivity exercise or teach them emotional modulation. It's just not something that's going to happen regularly in the workplace. They have that training, and they're going to walk off thinking, man, that was the worst decision I ever made. They're going to be they're going to do what I was talking about earlier. They're going to go inside and scenario, and every scenario is bad, and then they stack the scenarios together, and it's a really bad outcome. And now they come in the next day all down. The boss has forgotten about it. The boss emails, found out, oh, it's not a big deal. We're going to be okay. They already knew about it. Everything's fine with the boss, and you come in the next day, and you're like, the employee is nervous, looking for signs that, am I going to lose my job? So you can manage that. This is a crazy example, but it happens so often. I want that leaders have that responsibility, and it goes back to the leverage that they have and the perceived leverage that the employee gives them. For those people who are just joining, there's a link at the bottom, but it's also in the chat and the comments. So it's easy to press, then type in all of that. Just click the link. It's in the or comments, depending on what platform. And this link will be the same for all of the Ask Me Anythings, because I'll use this studio for the Wednesday morning Ask Me Anything. What's one if leaders can make that dramatic moves recovery on their teams? So I would say there's two shifts. One is the leader, whenever walking into a situation, this pre-listening, we definitely want the profession to be a productive one and aligned with the vision, quest, purpose, etc. But the other thing you can do is go up to it, because if you are in it, threats are magnified. When you can step back and be outside of it. Some people call it going meta. I call it dissociated. By being dissociated, you're stepping out and you're watching the entire thing. See yourself and you see the people. Just by doing that, moving away from the threat. So now when a question comes in or a challenge comes in, you're not reacting out of fear. You're able to focus and engage right off the bat. And more importantly, you can get a sense of the entire situation. One of the things I've done with people when they think that when there's conflict, I have them go in the mind. I have them imagine going behind the person they're talking to and looking at them. So now there's two people, right? There's them speaking to the person, two people in this, two of them, I should say. They're they're in a conversation with a person one on one like this. Then I have them go behind that other person and watch them. So the person I'm talking to, right? I'm talking to this person, which is hand. Make sure. And then what I'll have them do is the second of them come out and goes behind the person I'm talking to, and now they're watching and watching themselves speak. And often what'll happen is they'll recognize that their facial expression is responsible for this thing escalate. They don't realize it because they're just reacting. They're just reacting to what this person is saying. What they don't understand is they've gone into fear. And by going into fear mode, reactions are threat. They're fighting back a threat. And that's why it looks like they're attacking the other person. And then the other, so you can see how that just will go on. So if you're having a conflict with your employee, first of all, as the leader, it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to de-escalate. So it's up to you. You're not going to have your employee this. And managers and leaders think that their employees are supposed to adjust to them. I think that's misguided. This is what creates toxic environments. If you read the book Multiplies by Liz White, and they become a diminisher if they're doing that, because employees argue with you about that. They're not going to debate that. They're just going to go and get a good night's sleep and not bring that thing up anymore, not engage. They're going to disengage. They're going to start doing their hobby more rather than that. They're not going to take you on because you have too much leverage. The gap is too big. Getting back to the question, how does a leader accidentally create load instead of capacity? You can see that by having these interactions that when we're threatened by reacting, we can feel like we're attacking. The employee is going to have that feeling like this is no good. More and see if anybody wants to join in. And I'll do these each Wednesday. Hopefully we'll get ideally we'll get some people chiming in with real situations. I like this. How do you train reliability without relying on power? Now, willpower wanes throughout the day. It wanes with decision fatigue. And it's important to understand that willpower also correlates with a direct correlation, but heart rate variability correlates with coherence. So the more coherent I am in generally speaking, the higher variability I have. Heart variability is not the heartbeat changing. It's not like you were 60 beats a minute and now you're 57 beats a minute. Heart rate variability is the space between the beats. That little space in between the beats, when it can vary a lot, it's you that you're calm enough. The way to stand is if you are hyper, you're stressed and catastrophizing, your heart rate is accelerating very quickly, and there's no variation. Accelerating as fast as it can, it's beating as fast as it can, and it's pushing up as fast as it can. And there's no room for variability. When you're meditating, heart beat, while the heartbeat is slower, the heart slower, there's a lot more variation. And depending on how you're breathing, depending on what's going on in your mind, the space between the beats will change and adjust. That's your heart rate variability. That variability is high, you have high willpower because you're more coherent, you're more present, you're more mindful. When mindfulness, coherence goes out the window, you have rigidity and chaos, and your heart rate is going up, and you've lost the variability. That's why there's a correlation between willpower and heart rate variability. But the other thing that happens, and this is I this was taught to more people, is largely in the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex was formed from around age 19 or so to 27. If you think about the conditioning happening from 0 to 7, and then adjusted and tweaked to the teens, and then from 19 to 27, no science term, but I look at it as operationalizing the model of the world for the person. The prefrontal cortex has 20 billion neurons, a fifth of the neurons in the brain. They're there from the beginning, but they're not developed. They develop after. This is why we lock in the habits. This is why from 27, you just have to show up and your things get better. You're working on tricks, you're working on some new skill. I was thinking about skateboarding, right? Or skiing, whatever. You just show up in practice, you get better, you keep getting better, you keep getting better. After 27 or 28, something happens. You show up, you don't just get better anymore. You actually have to work at it. Before 27, deep practice is not as, it's still good, but the bar for myelination and the bar for synaptogenesis is so low that just by showing getting better. Once you pass 27, 28, and the prefrontal cortex is formed, you don't have the advantage of all these neurons being developed. By the neurons being developed, the BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors high, your synaptogenesis is very active. You got more than enough synapses to go around, and you're able to do things without willpower. Willpower is in the prefrontal cortex. When that's formed, you would think more willpower. The problem is the other thing, the prefrontal cortex, is I don't want power. And guess what? When you exercise willpower, you can trigger the I don't. The example I've used before is a person grows up and their parents don't like salespeople for whatever reason. They have a visceral negative reaction after a sales situation. Salespeople, the child may grow up thinking selling is bad. Now they're in a job that requires them to sell, and they've avoided selling most of their life, but they're in the C-suite and they have to sell to investors, and they're going to sales training. They get this tension inside that I don't want to do this. This is hard, and they have barriers. That's an example of the I don't want power coming in. Your effort, willpower forward, but now the I don't want power saying, yeah, but, and it's getting in the way. Now you're fighting against yourself. The solution is not to rely on willpower. Willpower is fine, but we need to change that upstream. We need to go up here and find out what's coming up, neutralize that, suppress it, but you can understand what's going on, and then you can use implementation intention, change your pre-listening, your question. You can use meditation to start imagining yourself as a successful salesperson and seeing the qualities or the benefits that come from being able to sell, and also reframing. So you can reframe the whole thing. And if you reframe and practice reframing, what's going to happen is the belief gets collapsed. The I don't want power is a belief that that thing is going to hurt you. That thing is detrimental, which is why it exists. It was for survival. It was created for people are bad. Therefore, I'm not going to like the idea of selling. That's what gets locked up for that 5 or 6-year-old person. And then it's carried on into adulthood. So you can collapse by reframing it, and then just it depends on how deep it is. But there are people, as a coach, when you listen to people, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want that. I want this. And you can see that's like dragging first base to get to second base. They're not going to let you do it. You're asking for something that can't be done. So we want to neutralize, don't want power, but we also want to be less on willpower and fix it upstream, the micro recovery. So you're never having to use willpower. You're changing it from the beginning. All right. That was a few questions. I will do this again next day. Please share the link with anybody on your team, anybody going through management stuff or situations, new managers, new leaders, new executive changes, whatever. Just come on. We'll talk about real situations. I'm for everything, but can talk about it in the context of what you can do differently to improve the situation. All right. Feel free to drop information into the comments. I'll see those later because this will be up on LinkedIn as an event. I'll leave it up for at least a few days. All right. Take care.